This happened when I was 18 and living alone in my apartment with my dog. I live about 8 miles outside of town, so getting food delivered can be a bit of a pain sometimes. I never thought much about using Uber Eats. You hear weird stories, but you never think it'll happen to you. At least I didn't. It was a Friday evening and I was cleaning up my apartment, getting things ready because my boyfriend was coming over the next day. We're long distance, so I try to have everything nice before he visits. I had been cleaning for a couple of hours, and by the time it was after 6 p.m., I was getting hungry. I didn't want to mess up the kitchen after just cleaning it, so I ordered food instead. The app said my driver, a man named Derek, was on the way in a white Honda Fit Sport. Since I'm a young woman living alone, I always choose the contactless delivery option, so they just leave the food at my door. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I got the notification that my food had been delivered. I jumped up, starving and excited, but when I opened the door, there was no food. I thought maybe he left it at the wrong door. I checked the hallway, looked at the nearby doors, nothing. I was about to message him when there was a knock on my door. It was my next-door neighbor holding my food. He said, "Hey, sorry. I grabbed this from your delivery driver. He was looking through your windows and it freaked me out." I took the food and thanked him, confused and weirded out. I ate, watched a movie, and started winding down. I took a shower, locked all the doors, and called my boyfriend before falling asleep. A few hours later, my dog started growling at the window. He's just a tiny 5-pound pup, but the growling still gave me chills. I calmed him down and got him to sleep. Not even 15 minutes later, I woke up to loud banging on my bedroom window. My dog went crazy, barking, growling, even whimpering. I froze. I pulled the blanket over me, leaving just enough to peek out at the window. I whispered to the police dispatcher, telling them someone was in my backyard and that my bedroom window doesn't lock. She told me to go to another room and said officers were on the way. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and waited. I peeked through the window and saw something that made my stomach drop, the same white Honda Fit Sport that delivered my food parked across the street. There's a big open field near my apartment where people park trailers and walk their dogs, and that's where his car was. But I couldn't see anyone inside it. I realized he's probably in my backyard. When the police showed up, I was shaking and barely able to speak. I explained everything to one officer while the others went to check the backyard and the car. The two came back and told the officer I was talking to that they found footprints in the backyard. It had just rained the night before, so the ground was muddy. That made it clear someone had been there. But here's the scariest part. He wasn't in the car, and so where did he go? My neighbor came outside when he saw the police. He told them how he had grabbed my food earlier when he saw the guy acting strange. He even offered for me to sleep at his place, but I said no. After the officers left, I tried to go back to sleep. I thought it was over. But at 2 a.m., there was pounding at my front door. I got up, scared to open the door. It was the same officer from earlier. She said they had stayed nearby to watch the place just in case he came back. And he did. They caught him walking up to my door like he was looking for a way in. My heart dropped when she said that. She told me they arrested him and that I was safe now. I thanked her, but I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. I've never used Uber Eats again when I'm home alone. When the pandemic was still causing all kinds of chaos, I started driving for Uber to make ends meet. I was laid off from my retail job and needed quick income. The thing about rideshare gigs is you see all kinds of people, especially when you're working late nights like I was. There were awkward encounters, drunk passengers, weird conversations, but none of that compares to what happened one Friday night in October. It was a little after midnight, and I had just dropped someone off at a hotel near the outskirts of town. My app pings almost immediately with a new request. The pickup location was about 6 minutes away in front of a bowling alley that was part of a strip mall. Pretty standard stuff. The name on the ride said Derek. I accepted it and started heading over. The area was quiet when I arrived, just a few dim parking lot lights. No cars in sight, and the bowling alley looked closed. But there was a man standing alone under one of the lights wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with his hands in his pockets, head down like he was looking at his shoes. As I pulled up, He looked at me but didn't wave or move. I rolled down the window and said, "You, Derek?" He nodded slowly, walked over, and got into the back seat behind me. I started the trip and asked him if the destination in the app was correct. An address about 20 minutes away in a residential neighborhood I'd never been to. He said, "Yeah, that's right," in a quiet, calm voice. I remember thinking he sounded a little off, not drunk or high, just sort of flat, emotionless. But I didn't think too hard about it at the time. I started driving and he didn't say anything for the next 5 or 6 minutes. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror now and then, and every time I looked, he was staring straight ahead. Not out the window or at his phone, just at the back of my head. I tried to break the silence by asking how his night was going. He paused, then said, "Just needed to get out of there." I asked out of where. He said, "Doesn't matter." So, I didn't push it. We drove a while longer. About 15 minutes in, I realized we were getting closer to the destination, but the address was in a really isolated part of town. No streetlights, big yards, and lots of trees. As we approached the address, he suddenly leaned forward and said, "Actually, can you pull into that driveway right there?" He pointed to a house on the right. The house was dark, no lights on inside or out. It looked old and abandoned, honestly. It had an overgrown lawn and paint peeling on the siding. There was also no car in the driveway. I said, "Is this your place?" And he said, "Just pull in." I hesitated but turned into the driveway. I stopped near the front of the house and put the car in park. He didn't get out. I looked back at him and said, "Everything all right?" He stared at the front door and said, "Wait here." And he got out and started walking toward the house. He didn't go to the front door. He walked around the side of the building and disappeared from view. Then he looked at me and said, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." He shut the door and walked off into the darkness behind the bowling alley. I sat there for a minute, too shaken to move. Eventually, I drove home, constantly checking my mirrors. When I got home, I looked at the trip details again. Something was off. The name had changed. It no longer said Derek. It was blank. No name, no profile picture, no trip history. It was like the ride never happened. I contacted Uber support to report it, but they told me the trip data was unavailable. They said sometimes that happens if the app crashes or if the rider cancels midway. But I know what I saw. I know I completed the trip. I know the man got in and out of my car, and I know he said what he said. "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." I've never seen him again, and I hope I never do. But every time I get a ping in a dimly lit parking lot or have a silent passenger in the back seat, I remember that night. And I remember that feeling that something terrible could have happened. That maybe he changed his mind at the last second, or maybe he was never planning to do anything, just wanted to scare someone. But I still wonder what he meant and if he ever found the right car. I was 26 at the time, and I'm a guy. I had flown into Washington, D.C. for a short vacation to visit my fiancée. Let's call her Emily. She was graduating from basic training, and it was a big moment for her and her family. I flew out a week early so she and I could spend time together before all her relatives came in. She stayed with me at my hotel, and after a few days, we decided to go explore some of the historic spots in D.C. We spent around 4 hours walking through places like the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and even got a glimpse of the White House. I'd never been there before, so I was pretty excited to see it all in person. Emily loved showing me around too. After all that walking, we were exhausted and ready to head back to the hotel. Emily pulled up the Uber app on her phone and ordered a ride. I sat down under a tree while we waited. About 10 minutes later, a gray minivan pulled up right where we were waiting. Emily motioned that it was our ride. It wasn't parked in a normal spot, but sometimes that happens. She opened the door and asked, "Uber for Emily?" The driver gave a little nod. No words. She got in, and I followed her. I didn't even think to double-check the car or the driver's name. That was a mistake. Once inside, the driver didn't say anything. Most Uber drivers at least say hi or confirm your name, but not this guy. He just started driving. I noticed it was weird, but I was too tired to care. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. A few minutes later, Emily tapped my arm. I looked over and saw her looking really worried. She showed me her phone. It had the Uber route pulled up, but the driver wasn't following it. He was going the opposite direction. A second later, she got a notification that her actual Uber had arrived, followed by a message from the real driver asking where she was. My stomach sank. That's when I realized we had gotten into the wrong car, or more accurately, into a car that wasn't an Uber at all. The guy driving us wasn't our driver, and the car didn't match the one on the app. I didn't say anything at first. I slowly looked at the driver, who still hadn't spoken. I needed to get us out of that car without making him suspicious. I leaned forward and said, "Hey, actually, we changed our plans. Can you just let us out here?" He looked at me in the rearview mirror for the first time, just stared. No words, no reaction. He kept driving. That's when I reached into my pocket and pulled out my pocket knife. I opened the blade and said, "Look, I know you're not our Uber driver. I don't know what you're planning, but I have a knife and I swear I'll use it if you don't pull over right now." He looked again in the mirror. He saw the knife in my hand. He swerved the van over to the side of the road and unlocked the doors. Emily and I didn't waste a second. We jumped out and ran. As soon as we were out, the guy sped off. We stood there trying to catch our breath. Emily was shaking. She called our actual Uber driver and explained what happened. He came and picked us up a few minutes later, and we made sure it was the right car this time. We told him everything, and what he told us next made my blood run cold. He said people pretending to be Uber drivers had become a big problem in the area lately, especially around tourist spots. He said several people had gone missing, and no one knew what happened to them. Tourists were easy targets. Most didn't check the car or driver info closely. We got lucky. The only reason we probably got out was because we didn't get far and because I was armed. We reported everything to the police and gave them as much detail about the car and driver as we could, but we never heard back. I don't know if he was ever caught. That scares me, knowing he might still be out there, doing the same thing to someone else. I've never forgotten how close that was. Now, I always double-check every single Uber. Always. I'm a 19-year-old girl living alone in a small rental house just outside of town. I was working a part-time job at the time and doing night shifts pretty often, so I used Uber a lot, especially when I got off work late and didn't feel like waiting for the bus. This story happened late last fall, and I still think about it way more than I want to. It was around 11:45 p.m. I had just finished my shift at the cafe I worked at. I was tired, it was cold, and all I wanted was to get home and crash. I ordered an Uber like I always did, and the app said my driver's name was Marcus. He was in a black Toyota Corolla. The app said he was 5 minutes away. When the car pulled up, it matched the info exactly. Same make, same color, same license plate. I got in, said hi, and he gave me a quick nod. He didn't really say much else, which was fine. I wasn't in the mood to chat either. I buckled up and just stared out the window while he started driving. For the first 10 minutes or so, everything seemed normal. We were heading in the right direction, and he wasn't being weird. But then I noticed we passed a turn we should have taken to get to my neighborhood. I leaned forward and asked, "Hey, aren't we supposed to turn there?" He said, "Taking a shortcut. GPS says it's faster." I looked at my phone. That shortcut wasn't showing on my map. I started getting a little nervous, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to accuse him of anything if it really was just a shortcut. But then he made another turn, onto a narrow road lined with trees on both sides. No streetlights, just pitch-black woods. At that point, I asked again, "Where are we going?" He said, "Don't worry, almost there." Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. I tried to stay calm and looked at the app again. It still said we were headed to my address, but the blue dot wasn't moving. The trip was still active, but the map wasn't updating. I realized we were completely off the main road now. That's when I decided I had to do something. I texted my friend my location as quickly as I could and then pretended to take a phone call. "Yeah, I'm in the Uber now. Should be home in 5 minutes," I said loud enough for him to hear. "You're already outside? Okay, see you in a sec." I hoped he'd get the idea someone was waiting for me. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror but didn't say anything. About 2 minutes later, he suddenly turned around and headed back toward town. Just like that. No explanation. When we got to a gas station near my street, he stopped the car and said, "This is as far as I go." I didn't argue. I got out fast and ran into the station. I stayed there until a friend came and picked me up. I reported the whole thing to Uber, but the trip details were gone, like wiped. No history, no Marcus, nothing. I don't know what his plan was. Maybe he really was just lost. But I don't think so. Now I only use Uber when I absolutely have to, and never without someone knowing exactly where I am. I was working as a pizza delivery driver back then, doing side gigs to save up for college. One night in early December, it was cold, dark, and snow had just started to fall lightly. I had just finished my last delivery when I got a ping from Uber. Yeah, I was doing both jobs at once. The request came from someone named Julian, and the pickup spot was at a gas station just off the highway. I figured it'd be quick. I drove over, and sure enough, there was a guy standing near the entrance wearing a black coat and a beanie. He wasn't on his phone or anything, just staring out at the road like he was waiting for something. I pulled up, rolled the window down, and asked, "Julian?" He didn't say anything, just nodded and got in the back seat. He was quiet. Not unusual for a late-night ride, so I started the trip. The app said his destination was about 30 minutes away in a rural area I'd never been to before. About 5 minutes into the drive, I noticed he kept fidgeting. Not in a nervous way, more like he was turning his head every few seconds, like he was watching for something outside the windows. I asked if everything was all right, and he said, "Yeah, I just don't like being followed." I laughed nervously and said, "Nobody's following us, man." He didn't respond. We kept driving, and I started noticing the road signs. We were heading into an area that wasn't just rural, it was almost unmarked. No houses, no lights, no traffic. Snow was starting to pick up, and I was beginning to regret taking the ride. About 10 minutes from the destination, Julian suddenly leaned forward and said, "Can we take the next left instead?" I looked and saw that it led down a dirt road covered in snow. I said, "That's not on the route, man. You sure?" He leaned a little closer and said, "I need to go that way. Trust me." I didn't know what to say. Something in my gut told me to say no, but I didn't want to escalate anything. I slowed down and said, "I'll pull over here and you can update the address in the app." He stared at me in the mirror, then sat back without a word. I stopped at the edge of the road, waiting. He didn't move, didn't touch his phone. Then he said, "They'll find me if I go home." I said, "Who?" No answer. Just silence, and the sound of snow hitting the windshield. Then he leaned forward again and said, "Drive anywhere, just don't go to that address." I decided I'd had enough. I told him I was ending the trip, and he needed to get out. He didn't move, just stared forward. I reached for my phone to call Uber support or maybe even the cops. That's when he opened the door slowly and stepped out into the snow. He didn't say a word. He just walked into the woods on the side of the road, disappearing into the trees. I sat there for a minute, stunned. Then I ended the ride and drove straight home. I never found out who he was or what was going on. His profile disappeared from my trip history the next day. I still wonder what he was running from, or who he thought was following him. This happened during the summer of 2022 on one of those hot, sticky nights where the air feels heavy, even after the sun's gone down. I had been doing Uber rides all evening and was just about ready to call it a night when one last request came in. The name said, Nina. And the pickup was only a few blocks away near a laundromat. I figured one more trip wouldn't hurt. I pulled up and saw a woman standing near the door of the laundromat, arms crossed, looking around like she was waiting on someone. She was wearing a black tank top and had her hair pulled up. She walked over when I stopped and asked, "You for Nina?" I said, "Yep, hop in," and she got in the back seat. She seemed normal at first. Quiet, polite, didn't say much. The drop-off location was listed as a motel about 20 minutes away on the edge of town. Nothing unusual about that. I started driving, and for the first 5 minutes or so, it was silent. Then I noticed she kept checking her phone and looking over her shoulder through the back window. "Everything all right?" I asked. She nodded quickly. "Yeah. Sorry, just a weird night." I didn't push it. About halfway through the drive, she finally spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Sure." "Have you ever had a rider ask you to keep driving? Like, not to the destination?" I said, "Once or twice. Usually it's someone who's drunk and changes their mind," she said. "This isn't like that. I think someone's following me." I glanced in the mirror. Her face looked pale, tense. I looked behind us. There were no headlights. I said, "There's no one there." She leaned toward the window, eyes scanning the darkness. "There was, before I got in your car. I think they saw me get in." That's when she asked me to skip the motel and just drive around for a while. I hesitated. "You'll need to change the drop-off in the app," I said. She shook her head. "I can't. They'll see it." Now I was confused. "Who's they?" She said nothing, just kept looking out the back. We drove in silence for another 10 minutes. She told me to turn randomly down different streets, some I'd never been on before. Every time we stopped at a light, she ducked a little lower in her seat. At one point, she whispered, "I think they're here. I can feel it." I was officially creeped out. I pulled into a well-lit gas station and told her I needed to stop and use the bathroom. She said okay and stayed in the car. I went inside, told the clerk what was happening, and asked if I could use the side phone to call the police without her hearing. The cops arrived less than 10 minutes later. They approached the car carefully and asked her to step out. She did, calmly. They talked to her while I stayed inside. One officer came in later and told me she was safe, just scared and probably dealing with some kind of trauma. She didn't want to go back to the motel and wouldn't say why. They were going to help her get somewhere safe for the night. That was the last ride I did for a week. I don't know what she was running from, or if anyone really was following her. But I'll never forget the way she kept whispering, "They know where I sleep." This happened just a few months ago. I don't drive for Uber, but I use it often to get home from work since I don't have a car. I work at a bookstore downtown, and usually I leave around 9:30 p.m. One night, I was especially tired, so I ordered my usual Uber home. The driver's name was Troy, and he was in a silver Nissan Altima. He pulled up right in front of the store. Everything matched the app: car, license plate, name. I got in and said hello. He smiled, nodded, and said, "Quiet night?" I said, "Yeah, just long." He was friendly, chatty in a calm way. Nothing weird at first. We started driving. My apartment is about 15 minutes from the store, not far. For the first few minutes, we talked about the weather, small talk stuff. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you live alone?" I paused for a second, then lied and said, "No, I live with my sister." He nodded slowly and said, "That's good. It's not safe to be alone these days." That gave me a strange feeling. I laughed awkwardly and changed the subject, asking if he'd been driving long that day. He answered, but kept glancing at me in the mirror. A minute later, we passed the turn to my street. "Hey, I think you missed the turn," I said. He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "I know, just taking a longer way." "No, I'd really like to just go home," I said, my voice firmer. He still didn't turn around. My heart started racing. I opened the app, and I saw that the route had been changed. The drop-off was now showing a completely different address, somewhere I didn't recognize near the outskirts of town. I asked him to stop the car. He didn't. I said louder, "Stop the car, right now." That's when he locked the doors. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stared at my phone, pretending to text, but I was really sharing my live location with my roommate. I added a quick message. "Call police. Driver won't let me out." We drove for another minute or two. Then I saw flashing lights in the distance. A police cruiser, just parked at a gas station. I yelled, and reached for the door handle, trying to unlock it. Something about the lights must have spooked him because he suddenly turned into the lot and stopped. Before he could say a word, I unlocked the door and bolted out, running straight to the officer. I was shaking. Could barely explain what happened. They talked to Troy. He said it was a misunderstanding. Claimed I asked to go to the other address. Said he just got confused. I told them that was a lie and showed them the original trip info and the route change. My roommate confirmed she got my message and had already started calling 911. The officers told me I was smart to share my location. They couldn't hold him since technically no crime was committed, but they made a full report and advised me to block and report him through Uber immediately, which I did. The next day, his profile was gone. I don't know what he was planning, but I know it wasn't just a wrong turn. This happened in 2020, right after I moved to a new city for school. I didn't know many people yet and didn't have a car, so I relied on Uber to get around, especially for late classes or trips to the store. One evening around 8:30, I finished grocery shopping and called an Uber from the store parking lot. The driver's name was Eli, and he was in a dark blue Hyundai Sonata. He showed up on time. Everything matched the app. He rolled the window down and said, "You waiting on Eli?" I said yes and got in the back seat. He was older, maybe mid-50s, polite, very quiet. The car was clean, and the ride started out normal. I gave him a quick, "Thanks again," and we pulled out of the lot. About 5 minutes in, I noticed something strange. He had a phone mounted on the dash like most drivers do, but the navigation wasn't on. No GPS. He wasn't using the Uber route at all. I asked, "You know the way already?" And he smiled a little and said, "I always take care of my own directions." I didn't know what to say to that. We weren't off course yet, so I didn't want to overreact. But I started watching the turns closely. Then he made a left, away from the main road, completely off the route to my apartment. I immediately said, "I think we're going the wrong way." He replied, "Just taking a quicker path. Don't worry, I'll get you home safe." That made my stomach drop. I quickly opened the Uber app to see where we were. The location dot showed us drifting further and further from my actual destination. I said louder, "Please turn around, I want to go the normal way." He didn't answer, just kept driving. At that point, I sent my roommate my live location and a message. "This Uber isn't taking me home. Call me now." She called immediately. I picked up and said loud and clear, "Hey, yeah, I'm almost home. You're outside waiting, right?" She played along. "Yep, right outside." I looked at Eli in the mirror. My roommate's waiting at the door. She's watching for the car. He looked at me, then at the road, then suddenly pulled into a gas station and stopped. "Just needed to stop for a second," he mumbled. I grabbed my bag and got out fast. I walked inside the store and told the clerk what was happening. I asked if I could wait inside and use the phone if needed. They let me stay behind the counter while I called my roommate again and reported everything to Uber. When I looked back outside, Eli's car was gone. Uber followed up later and said his account was being reviewed. A few days after, his profile was gone. No explanation, no confirmation. Just gone. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't pretended someone was waiting for me. This happened back in 2019 when I went to visit my cousin for a week in another state. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and I thought a little getaway would be fun. I didn't know the area at all, so I used Uber for everything. Groceries, food runs, sightseeing, all of it. It was convenient and felt safe enough. One night, my cousin and I went out to a local diner for dinner. Things were going fine until we got into a stupid argument. Something small that spiraled way too fast. Emotions were running high, and I could tell we both needed space. Rather than stay the night at her place and make things worse, I decided to book a nearby motel and cool off. It was late, almost 11:30 p.m., when I requested an Uber. The app showed a driver named Caleb in a white Chevy Cruze. Estimated arrival, 3 minutes. I stood out front of the diner under a flickering sign, holding my duffel bag and scrolling through my phone. A few minutes later, the car pulled up. I double-checked the license plate and everything matched. The driver rolled down the passenger window and said, "You heading to the motel off Route 9? I was a little caught off guard because I hadn't even said the destination out loud, but I nodded. "Yeah." He gave me a smile, too wide, too slow, and said, "Hop in." I hesitated for just a second, then got in the back seat and buckled up. The first couple minutes of the ride were quiet. He didn't play music, didn't ask me the usual questions like most drivers do. The windows were cracked open, and cold air was blowing in even though it was a chilly night. I pulled my hoodie tighter and looked out the window. Just dark streets and traffic lights. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "You traveling alone?" The way he said it wasn't casual. It didn't feel like small talk. I instantly felt a tightness in my chest and I answered quickly, "No, my cousin's meeting me at the motel. She went ahead to check in." He didn't say anything to that. A few minutes passed before he spoke again. "You ever stay out here before?" "No," I said. "Not the best area," he muttered. "People go missing out here." My heart sank. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a test. I faked a laugh. "Good thing my cousin's already there. She knows the area." He didn't respond. The silence in the car was unbearable now. I glanced down at the Uber app on my phone, trying to distract myself, but something immediately caught my eye. We were going the wrong way. The route on the app had us turning left back near the highway, but we had already gone past that street. We were heading away from Route 9, deeper into what looked like a more rural part of town. Fewer streetlights, bigger gaps between houses, more trees. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you missed the turn back there." No answer. I leaned forward slightly, repeating louder, "The motel's the other way." He kept his eyes on the road. No acknowledgement. My hands were starting to sweat. I looked at the phone again. The app still showed the ride as active, but the little blue dot showing our location wasn't even on the road anymore. It was off course. I didn't know what to do, but something inside me screamed that I had to act fast. I opened the app and tapped the emergency button. Uber has a safety feature that starts a loud alert countdown before contacting emergency services. As soon as it started beeping, Caleb snapped, "What are you doing?" I held the phone up so he could see. This app tracks everything. If you don't turn around, the cops will know where I am. He looked at me through the rearview mirror. His eyes were cold and unreadable. For what felt like forever, we just stared at each other. Then, without a word, he jerked the wheel and made a sharp U-turn. We drove back in silence. This happened in early January, right after the holidays. I had flown back to my hometown after spending 2 weeks visiting family in another state. My flight had been delayed a few hours, so by the time we landed, it was almost 12:45 a.m. The airport was quiet. Most of the shops were closed, the terminal lights were dimmed, and only a few other people were scattered around waiting for their rides. I was tired, cold, and just wanted to get home and into bed. I pulled out my phone and opened the Uber app. The streets looked clear on the map, so I figured I'd be home within 20 minutes tops. The app assigned me a driver named Victor R., driving a dark green Ford Explorer. His profile picture was blank, but the license plate matched what was shown. He accepted the ride instantly, and it said he was about 5 minutes away. Everything looked normal. I dragged my suitcase outside to the passenger pickup lane and waited under one of the flickering yellow lights. The air had that icy, dry chill to it, and the wind kept blowing my hood off. A few cars passed, but none stopped. Then, right around the 5-minute mark, the SUV pulled up. I double-checked the plate. It matched. The car was clean. Not just clean, but spotless. I don't know why I noticed that, but it looked freshly detailed, almost too perfect. The window rolled down. The man behind the wheel was middle-aged, maybe in his late 40s, wearing a black cap and a heavy coat zipped to his neck. He looked at me, gave a small nod, and said in a low voice, "You waiting on Victor?" I nodded. "Yeah." Without another word, he reached over and popped the trunk. I loaded my suitcase in and got into the back seat. The inside smelled like pine-scented air freshener. Not bad, just strong. The leather seats were cold and stiff under me. As soon as I buckled in, he looked at me in the mirror and asked, "Everything good?" I said, "Yeah, thanks for the pickup." He nodded again and pulled away from the curb. The first few minutes were uneventful. We exited the airport and got on the highway. He didn't play music or talk much, which was fine with me. I stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur past. I was zoning out when I noticed something. We passed an exit we were supposed to take. I blinked, sat up a little, and glanced at the Uber app. The route clearly showed we should have turned onto one of the main roads that led straight into the city. But we didn't. Instead, we stayed on the highway, heading in a direction I didn't recognize. I leaned forward slightly and said, "Hey, isn't that the turn to get downtown?" There was a pause. Then Victor said, "Just taking a faster way. GPS is slow sometimes." It was such a casual answer, almost too casual. But something about his tone made me uneasy. I stared at my phone. The trip was still active. My home address was still listed as the drop-off, but the little blue dot showing our location wasn't updating. It had frozen. I tapped the screen. Nothing moved. I looked out the window again. The lights had disappeared. The road was darker now. Trees lined both sides of the highway and there were no other cars around. I hadn't seen another headlight in over 5 minutes. I cleared my throat. "I think the app's bugging. Can you just follow the route? My street's easier to get to that way." He didn't respond, just kept driving. I unlocked my phone again and quickly sent a text to my roommate. "My Uber is acting weird, not going the right way. Please call me now." She called within seconds. I answered on speaker. "Hey," I said loudly, forcing cheer into my voice. "You're still outside, right? You see me pulling up?" There was a pause on her end, then she caught on. "Yeah, I'm here. I see your location. You close?" "Yep. I'll be there in like 2 minutes," I said, making sure Victor could hear. He looked at me through the rearview mirror. His expression didn't change. Then he did something I didn't expect. He pulled off the highway onto a narrow service road, barely more than a path, with no lights at all. I couldn't even see the shoulder of the road. It was just thick woods and deep darkness. My voice trembled now. "Why are we turning here? This isn't on the route." Still nothing. I could feel the blood draining from my face. My hands were sweating, and I kept my phone in my lap, still connected to the call. I whispered into the speaker, "Stay on the line." A few minutes passed in silence, and then, finally, Victor pulled over. We were in the middle of nowhere. I didn't see a single house, sign, or even a mailbox. He stopped the car and said in that same calm voice, "You can get out here." "What?" I said, frozen. "You can walk from here," he repeated, voice flat. I looked around. There was nothing but dark woods on both sides of the road. I couldn't even hear crickets, just dead silence and the ticking of the car engine cooling. "I'm not getting out," I said. "This isn't my address." He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just looked at me once more in the mirror, then slowly unlocked the doors. I grabbed my bag and got out, barely able to breathe. The second I shut the door, he drove off without a word. No headlights, no taillights, just disappeared into the night. I was shaking. I told my roommate exactly where I was and kept her on the phone while I walked back toward what I hoped was the main road. My phone battery was low, my fingers were numb, and the wind had picked up. Every step I took, I kept looking behind me. After nearly 20 minutes of walking in the cold, I saw a gas station glowing in the distance. I nearly cried. I went inside, explained what had happened to the clerk, and he let me stay behind the counter until my roommate arrived. I reported the driver to Uber that night, attached screenshots of everything. Trip details, messages, my shared location. By the next morning, the trip had vanished. No receipt, no rating option, no Victor in my ride history. Nothing. Just gone. I don't know who he was. I don't know where he was planning to take me, but I know he never intended to take me home. And I know I never ride alone from the airport anymore, not without someone tracking my location the entire time.